Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room. We're a Vancouver Island-based issues and information show, and right now, guess what? We are focused on the BC election, and nobody in the world is more focused on that than my co-host with the most, the Croatian sensation, John Jurisic. And John, this is getting to be a nail-biter.
Robin, no kidding, especially from 3 to 6 months ago when that was not the case. So much has happened. And the polling is now creating all kinds of more discussion for us. This new Leger poll, out from late September, indicates the Conservatives widening their advantage. If the vote was held today, BC Conservatives would garner 45% support of decided voters. BC NDP would be at 43%, with the Green Party maintaining a 10% support of decided voters. This is only one poll, Robin. And Angus Reid came out with the two leaders in a dead heat, right together. Then there's the new mainstream poll that came out just this last week.
And the Main Street poll is even more of an eye-opener, John. And it really does suggest if these polling numbers hold, the BC Conservatives will be the next government. We'll have to wait and see. But here on Main Street Research's outcome, BC Conservatives, 43%, adding up to 52 seats in the legislature. BC NDP, 41.9, that's 40 seats. BC Green Party, actually down fractionally, down to 9.9%, but now registering one seat. No registration of a win by an independent at this point. So why is David Eby, you may well ask, making so many major announcements, big spending promises, changing policy on the fly? Well, you have to think the guy's got to be scared. And, you know, there's lots of indications of this. For example, in Surrey, he told a huge crowd the NDP is going to reduce provincial income taxes on families, which work out to about $500 a person in 2025. So a tax and spend party is now axing the tax as he strives to match income tax cuts already promised by the BC Conservatives. And there's more. Premier Eby is really playing hardball. He's written an open letter to John Rustad asking him to drop what he describes as dangerous and extreme candidates. And to paraphrase here, this is what Eby writes: Corey, Sankey, Tepper, Bagu, and Hatwell all have advanced anti-democratic conspiracy theories that the 2020 U.S. election was stolen from Donald Trump and the January 6th riots were a hoax.
Well, all right. John Rustad is getting big crowds, big support on the campaign trail. Here in downtown Vancouver, lots of people came out to see the BC Conservative leader. And there were lots of young faces, Robin, in the crowd. Yes, there may have been some unfortunate, frankly, stupid statements by candidates in the past, but apparently a lot of people are saying, that's the past. We want things to change now, and we want to have better lives.
And we did have a response to the open letter from Victoria Beacon Hill BC Conservative Tim Thielman. He had this to say about the letter demanding that candidates be dropped. BC Conservatives are focused on fixing the housing crisis, the healthcare crisis, the drug crisis, and affordability. Let the NDP obsess over U.S. politics. Eby also went on the offensive about another Conservative candidate, Brian Burgett, he says, posted sexist views, derogatory remarks about Indigenous people. So it's getting down in the mud. And is that really a good place to go in a tight campaign like this, or is it just a sign of desperation? In other campaigns, it's been known to blow back. For example, in Alberta, Rachel Notley, also running for the NDP to hold on to a government position as premier, she decided to get in the mud as well, and it didn't work out, and her government was defeated.
Yeah, I remember that. Exactly. What does always work then is good messaging and real solutions. According to the Leger survey, the leading issues are healthcare, interest rates, and the economy. And number one, with a bullet, with a dart, with an arrow, is housing affordability. Both parties understand this and have presented their solutions.
And, John, I think that's completely correct about housing being number one on people's mind. The conservative housing plan, $3.5 billion tax credit, that's $1,500 per month towards rent or a mortgage payment, up to $3,000 per month by 2029, that all coming from the BC portion of your income tax. In contrast to that, the New Democrats also have their housing proposal, $1.2 billion per year. This to finance 40% of mortgage for the first-time buyer and 25,000 new housing units over the next 5 years, as promised.
And you have to think, would these plans work? Is one better than the other? We asked veteran realtor Kevin Sing for his take on these election promises. Will they fix our housing crisis?
They sound really great when you make 20-second sound bites, but if you actually do the analysis, there are some real limitations. The biggest problem I have with both of these is they're not addressing supply; they're addressing demand. They're holding out pieces of candy for people who think they can actually buy a property now. Well, when we have an inventory shortage, that's the real problem. There's some really interesting nuances that are not mentioned in these big announcements. The NDP plan of carrying the 40% second mortgage, the income qualifications, it only lands on new construction because they think that might be a way to incentivize new construction. You don't have the construction workers here in British Columbia to actually build the numbers that the NDP is throwing around. I mean, that's part of the problem, is that right now housing is so unaffordable. There's a limited availability of real people who can do the real jobs to do these things. And then what does the future look like when the government owns 40% of your property? Hard to understand how that could shake out.
But they are both talking about tax breaks and money going back and being able to make it easier for people to pay for their mortgages. You don't buy it?
Well, the Rustad plan is interesting because it's actually a deduction on your BC portion of your income tax. It's income driven, so it's not going to help the lower income people because they're not going to be able to get into the market to take advantage of this. So again, it's got limited appeal.
Kevin Sing also says we need to get a lot more government-owned land, crown land out there. Make it very low cost, make it really affordable, allow people to get into the housing market, get the numbers of homes available out there, get the inventory up. It certainly is a huge need, and it is our number one issue as far as we can see, John.
Exactly. However, it almost feels like there's a multitude of number one issues, like the issue of dangerous drugs and crime. How do you rank these things? It's as dangerous and as important as all of them. There are new promises by the NDP to move addicts and the mentally ill into compulsory facilities. But nothing's happened so far, and the only facilities we're hearing about are places like the Addict and Housing Support Center on Dollar Street, where neighbors are still up in arms.
And Marianne Alto, Mayor of Victoria, again attended a pack house to hear speaker after speaker say they don't want this type of facility set up in a residential neighborhood near a school. The mayor and council approved funding, support this project without consultation, and the mayor says the neighbors need to get used to the idea. Now, this is a very unhappy outcome. And the same is the case in some ways in what's happened recently in Nanaimo, where there was a very ugly incident. And a BC Conservative candidate is now making her feelings felt about the situation.
Do you want to buy some street-grade fentanyl and a couple rocks of crack? It's easier than you think. Yesterday, the RCMP busted drug dealing that occurred right here in this safe injection site. In BC, you can work and be paid as a peer support worker and at the same time profit off the misery of your clients by selling them the very same drugs that are causing harm. All of this happens in plain sight. Across the way is the MLA and the MP's office. On this side is the safe injection site. I know a little bit about the relationship between a dealer and their client. You see, I lost my sister in this drug crisis. Drug dealers don't care about their clients. Drug dealers are manipulative because they have one motive, and that motive is to make money. We cannot have a system that gives dealers 24/7 access to vulnerable people.
The problem with ramming through policies without public buy-in is you have to flip-flop when election times come, with egg on your face. When it comes to drug and enforcement, this has certainly been the case for David Eby, and our Rumble viewers have certainly written in.
Absolutely. We've heard from Alf, and he had a few things to say. The NDP have stoked the fire with their decriminalization and open drug use, soft on crime policy. Now suddenly they are realizing their errors and want a hero's biscuit for admitting they were wrong. Don't believe a word they say. They would not listen before, and they won't keep their promises now.
Thank you, Alf. So where is this election heading? Dr. Michael Prince is a keen student of BC politics. He's figuring this could all come down right to the wire. Let's hear more from Michael and zoom him in.
And now, once again, joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room, an esteemed guest, somebody we always look forward to talking to. He is, in fact, UVic's Lansdowne Professor of Social Policy, a political scientist, Dr. Michael Prince. Great to have you back.
Always a pleasure, Robin and John.
And we've got so much to ask you about. I want to talk, of course, about the election and maybe the lines that are being blurred, at least in some of the communications. The politics and policies in BC seem to be very similar to what we're hearing out of Ottawa, and there's a lot of overlap, and it would seem that we're also having a verdict right now on David Eby's performance as measured in comparison to, say, Justin Trudeau's. Would you agree with that? There's a lot of sort of mix and match between the federal and the BC scene.
Absolutely. And I would also add the U.S. presidential elections, where we're seeing some of our politicians here in BC, even before the writ came out, positioning themselves, and we've seen it in Ottawa as well, borrowing some of the lines, whether it's from Kamala Harris or on the other side, Donald Trump lines, whether it's the politics of anger or the politics of joy, the politics of hope, the politics of innuendo and slander. Now, it's early days, but, over the next 30 days or so in this provincial election, depending on how the polls show, how the different parties are faring, whether one or other will be gloating or panicking, and then do they change their strategy?
Michael, I'm just always so excited when you come to talk to us. We hear you on the radio, we hear you on TV. You're in the Rumble Room today. Yeah.
Love it,
I have
guys.
to admit, as you just stated, this is a pretty exciting, unpredictable election. It's already getting pretty heated. Some folks are saying it's the neatest one that we've ever heard. We've only had about 3 days of it. Rise of the Conservatives, fall of the United. Wow. Very quick policy changes of the NDP. Flip, flop, flip. Things like carbon tax, etc. Kind of what's grabbing your attention? Out of all this stuff, what is rising to the top to capture your attention? And what do you think are the pitfalls of these respective parties that have remained?
Yeah, great. We talk a lot, and we will over the next many weeks looking at polls and talking about the overall, it's a dead heat statistically coming into the election in 42 or 43 or 40 and 41. Those are overall. To me, provincial elections are quintessentially local contests and maybe regional. And I think we see polls are showing that very clearly. At the local level, we've got this unknown factor, John, about, having 5 BC United, a party without a leader, but very experienced and well-known, and I would say fairly well-respected former Liberal MLAs or former BC United MLAs saying, I'm not throwing in the towel. I'm going to run. And, I think we have to watch very closely how those 5 or 6 seats play out. And so don't underestimate the power of the local, even though there may be provincial-wide polls, and we'll get lots of them that aggregate up to the overall average. So, provincial elections are, first of all, local. Regionally, polls are showing, will the NDP be able to hold the gains they made in new places, whether it's in Richmond or Surrey or Langley? That was again, to use an American phrase, the pathway to victory or to a majority was the success John Horgan, Now, this is much different time than back in 2017, or again, the COVID snap election that we had that was called by the NDP, and a different premier, a premier who's not been tested before. So we have the two major leaders. This is their first major election as leaders of their parties. Who would have thought Sonia Furstenau, the leader of the small but mighty little Green party, she's the seasoned veteran. We'll have a televised debate in a couple of weeks. She's done this before. It'll be a real chance for British Columbians to see how David Eby and John Rustad conduct themselves, and all the sparks. For those of us with long political memories, and I know you guys have this as much as I do, will there be a Gordon Wilson moment like the early 90s, that debate between Rita Johnson for the social credit and Mike Harcourt, favored to be leading in the polls, favored to form a government, SoCred spiraling down, and they went into a slugfest and it allowed Gordon Wilson to have that moment that every politician dreams of and their handlers dream of in a debate, to have that knockout punch, that grab, the ballot box moment. And we saw that led to the revival of the BC Liberals. So, Sonia Furstenau's got to be having dreams and hopes that could be her moment. Depending how nasty or dirty it gets between the two major party leaders, will this provide new life and a revival for a Green Party that right now looks like it's on life support and polling very low numbers? Even a fair question asks, will they win one or two seats, or will they be eliminated? I mean, there's a better chance that the former BC United MLAs could have official party status in the next legislature with 3, 4, or 5 seats. I don't see that for the Green right now at this stage of the campaign. So fascinating, John, just all the permutations. This, as I say, depending on how the campaigns go, I'm not quite sure what the ballot box question is that each of the leaders are trying to put in front of us. I know it's early days in the campaign, but as you both well know, that's what every party wants to do, is frame the campaign in a way that the obvious logical answer is, you got to vote for us.
It's interesting you mentioned Gordon Wilson, and we'll be talking to Judy Tyabji in an upcoming show, so that'll be good fun. I might also throw in, though, that Adrian Dix, very late in his campaign against Christy Clark, decided to hold a media conference down in English Bay where he announced they were going to stop all the pipeline development in BC, and they say that cost him the election. That was late in the race. And so these things can happen in unexpected ways. You think you're making a great news announcement, and suddenly the public go, wait a minute, we don't like that announcement. And it's coming back and forth with both parties. I did want to talk a little bit about the opinion polls. There was one that indicated off the top, the Main Street poll, that if the election was held today, the Conservatives would win more seats, irrespective of it. It was only, I think, a point between the two in terms of popularity. It was the distribution of where those supporters were that gave the Conservatives an advantage. And I have to think that that's one of the reasons we're seeing David Eby suddenly softening on some of his stands on things like the carbon tax and putting people into enforced help if they have mental illness and addiction problems and other things, that he sees that he's losing ground in that way. But there's still lots of time.
And with the not the disappearance, but the dramatic removal of the BC United as a kind of a center-right option, and people seeing the Conservatives as further to the right, perhaps the NDP have said maybe they've got to tiptoe a little closer to the center and kind of fill some of that. And as you were said earlier, both of you, about what's been going on in Ottawa, I mean, the success that the Conservative leader and his party has had, Pierre Poilievre, in Ottawa, about hammering away on the carbon tax, calling for what he calls a carbon tax election nationally. The mistakes Mr. Trudeau's had over the last year defending his own carbon tax regime nationally. So you're right. I think the consensus, we've seen it on 2 or 3 issues. Immigration nationally, we've seen a broad-based Canadian consensus soften on that because of the mishandling of housing and immigration together, creating tremendous problems. And we're seeing that on the carbon tax and the environmental climate action agenda. It's not enjoying the same middle-of-the-road support it did, say, a few years ago. So we're starting to see parties shifting. You mentioned Adrian Dix. I remember when he made that announcement, part of the blowback was that he had not given a heads up or consulted with his own candidates. So they were out doing door knocking and being told, hey, have you just heard what your leader has said? with this major flip flop or shift. That was tremendously demoralizing and destabilizing for a campaign, a bit of a panic. So, whatever leader, perhaps Mr. Eby has made his main changes early on, got them out of the way. That'll set the narrative. But if we see them continue to see changes in either party, major party's positions, you got to wonder the risks that brings. I mean, on the one hand, they're obviously going to try to do it strategically, Robin, thinking it'll hold some support or regain some support. But I think, some of the issues, you're right, quite clearly in Richmond or Surrey, you're going to have to talk public safety. You're going to have to talk about the opioid and the mental health crisis. You probably have to do it throughout the province. But my sense is certain issues will have greater visibility or salience or importance to voters. So it might be the same top 5 or 6 issues, but the combination of them and the relative strength of the concerns locally would be different. But you're right. You can never lose on talking about good old bread and butter issues about, a better future for your kids or your grandkids, that they get a job, they can stay in the province. I mean, John Rustad is talking about that in his first few days about hope. I mean, he's trying to add that in with his anger. So he's trying to mix an interesting combination. They're probably getting coached on that. But and then, of course, we'll see the weird and wonderful social media exposés of, this candidate 4 years ago posted a website statement on this, that. It never ceases to amaze me, the lack of vetting or the revenge of the past media post that comes back and bites a candidate in the bum. And then just to see how quickly, given the cobbled together coalition of candidates Mr. Rustad has, there's a real risk there that there's still going to be some bad surprises. But we can, and there may be on the other parties as well. But, that always seems to be a little extra bonus for journalists to be able to cover in these campaigns.
Okay, Michael, we're gonna do what mainstream media will not, and we are going to ultimately ask you what's going to happen. No, okay. Notwithstanding that there could be a major campaign issue during the campaign.
Yeah.
We could see a Gordon Wilson moment. We could see an Adrian Dix moment. So campaigns matter. I get it, but actually, what's going to happen here if the election was tomorrow?
Well, I think the NDP have a large majority. They won some seats in areas they had not won before. I think part of that was a reaction to the history of the Gordon Campbell, Christy Clark years. There was a mood of time for a change. I don't sense it yet that there's the same widespread fatigue with the current government. I sense disappointment. There's been some controversial decisions made by this government, particularly on the housing file and what impact that's having on local governments and the ability on zoning and so forth. Those are real bread and butter issues, and they hit home locally. So how those play out, on the other hand, a government that's trying to be ambitious and aggressive on the housing crisis. So I see this as a government that was going to lose seats even before we saw the dramatic BC United change. So at this point, I would say a reduced majority government, a small majority government for the NDP at this stage. But you're right, John. That's how will the televised debate play out? Will there be, as Robin said earlier, some unilateral U-turns on policy that, on the one hand, are intended to kind of shore up support, but have the unintended backlash? Will we see a surprise moment for Sonia Furstenau? Will we, will this gang of 4 or 5, will they just be individuals, as Robin said? Peace River area, yeah, that's going to be incumbents versus conservatives. NDP aren't a factor. Greater Vancouver, that's going to be the battleground. Richmond, Surrey, Langley, those will be the seats to watch over the next coming weeks.
So, Michael Prince has come out of the weeds, John. You got him out of the weeds to make not a heavy prediction, but certainly speculation at this point. At least he thinks the NDP is going to stay in power, and that's interesting to see. Of course, everything could hinge on what happens during the debate. We'll all watch with great interest, and of course, on the 19th, when votes are cast, that'll be fascinating. We also are going to get Maverick Liberal, former Maverick BC Liberal Judy Tyabji's 2 cents on the debate and what's going on with this election campaign. She'll be our guest next week, and she did send in a prediction for this show. I predict some independent candidates will be elected from former BC United membership. and there will be a conservative government. So I can't wait to talk to Judy Tyabji. Such an interesting person. Used to debate with her when we worked in radio. We used to do a program together called Radio Rumble. So this will be fun to have Judy in and talk about her new book about Rich Coleman. It's called That's Rich, The Rise and Fall of the BC Liberals. And we'll be doing a bit of a book review. That'll be the second part of our discussions with Judy Tyabji. Looking forward to it, John. But now, after all that, it's time to say goodbye. And again, thank our many viewers for all their support on the variety of platforms that we use, encouraging people where possible to repost, share, and basically support the Rumble Room. So over to you.
Yeah, you bet. I can't wait for that interview with Judy. And I understand that name of your radio show was the sort of genesis of the name of the Victoria Rumble Room. So there are some cool connections here. Robin, it's such an exciting time. You can see how excited I am to be doing a show like this. Lots of campaigns underway all over North America and so much to talk about. Oh my gosh. We again want to thank the over 2.3 million people who've collectively checked out the Rumble Room since we got this project started, which is now almost 3 years ago. Holy mackerel. It feels like 3 weeks ago we're having so much fun. Can't thank everyone enough. And you can thank us, follow us, share us, like us on all of these platforms that include Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Obviously, we have a audio podcast version of the show, and we're also on Instagram and TikTok, where we occasionally get the odd viral moment. Now, that's it for me. I remain the Croatian sensation, the king of tulip, and who knows what else people want to call me, but certainly bastion of democracy, John Jurisic.
And you know, John, when I think of you and I think of a bastion, I often think of Bastion Square in Nanaimo. I'm not sure why that is. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.